This is the Tuesday Mind Emission on the Toad Cam, coming from you-know-where, New York City, where we rock and we rule and we be so cool and we rap so bad. So my observation is this, that people grow up to a point. It's a very funny thing, and I've noticed this throughout my life. And I don't know if it's got something to do with what's actually encoded in the neuronal DNA. It's almost like a clock. But people stop growing. And they either stop growing or their psychic growth, their psychic maturation seems to slow to a crawl in many cases, not all, but most cases. It seems that there's a point where the person's internal development, their intellectual development, their spiritual development, their psychic development is moving along at a pretty good clip, and then all of a sudden it just stops. In some cases, I've seen this at people at 18, some people 25, some people 30, some people 35, where it's just kind of, they hit this place, and it's as if whatever internal dynamics regulate the way that the neuron actually is constantly growing and adapting, just stops, and that these people are really kind of time-stamped at a certain point in their life. Like, okay, that's who I am. 25, bang, it stopped, and that's who you're going to be. And I've seen this developmental freezing happen in so many different environments, so many family systems, subcultures. I see this a lot, in the NLP community, in this sort of, whatever more inner circle of the NLP community. A lot of very, very developmentally arrested people, or just developmentally frozen people, who have no awareness that they're developmentally frozen. I think that's one of the stranger things about the human condition, is that from an external position of observation, people be moving along and then just wham, they're like all of a sudden it's like some kind of fast set epoxy resin, and they are in that shape, and that's going to be their shape for the rest of their life, barring some major external transformative destabilizing input. In a few cases, in rare cases, people seem to maintain, and I think this is a kind of a very rare and delightful and unusual person, someone who has maintained the momentum of their growth throughout their entire life, and every stage of their life is kind of stamped with the moment, but the next moment that comes along, they're somehow adapting and growing and moving into the present, into the future. There's sort of a living phototropic dynamism about them that constantly is pushing for this further eye-opening, mind-opening, further developmental sort of force, that's about life force that's in them. And that seems to be a huge, huge distinguishing feature between the kind of frozen in place people and the constantly growing, constantly moving people. From what I've read, the work of some of the neuroscience of Gary Lynch was very interesting in this way, that there are probably processes that are actually engendered or caused or brought into being by the very active use of the mind, a constant pushing, hungering, questing, active use of the mind, an active engagement of the mind, that actually produces internal protein changes and enzyme changes in the dendritic and axonal stalks and in the nucleus of the cell. In a sense, you've got to really be very deep way, dynamically, constantly energizing the thought process from within in order to bring about literal, structural, physical changes in the surface of the neurons. Even though the neurons you have those neurons for life in many cases, with some exceptions of some stem cells that have been located, say, in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus, and probably other parts of the brain do have some stem cell potentiation in there. But it seems that the neuronal element, the structure of the neuron itself, is capable, under certain conditions, of a constant mutagenesis, a constant plasticity, and it's constantly, if you could see it living under an electron microscope, you'd probably see this thing almost like a plant moving and adapting to its environment, very vigorously. But it seems in order to do that, the mind has to be very, very engaged. It has to be very deeply consciously engaged. And what I do see, on another hand, is many people who have become very comfortable in sort of formulaic, repetitious, just mumbling out the mumbo jumbo, or just sort of very, very grooved into their life pattern. This process, this sense of sort of inner urgency is lost, and it seems like it's once that inner urgency is lost or damped down to kind of a minimal state, it's very, very, very hard to restart that kind of almost childlike, passionate urge to neuroplasticity, that urge to sort of more, that urge to consciousness, that kind of almost fury to bring oneself living fully into the present and into the future. It's kind of like Alfred North Whitehead on a rocket sled. You've got to really slam it into the next state. And I think NLP, when used vigorously and dynamically and creatively and passionately and mind-expandingly, does help engender that process, does help motivate that process. And on the other hand, there's so many people I see in NLP, and I'm not going to blame only NLP, but people who have really become kind of in a sense, kind of passive, half-asleep consumers of the kind of consciousness product, the kind of commodified consciousness mumbo jumbo bullshit consciousness products and recorded stuff and stuff they go do, but it's not really. But they don't really pick up the ball and run with the sort of passion for self-awakening. And so you get this kind of banal, kind of missing the point, blah, 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 kind of, oh, I've done this and I've done that, and I blow do all these things, and they just kind of remain inertly, passively who they always were, with just, a few extra layers of candy coating or a few extra layers of, kind of acrylic lacquer on top of this immobile structure. So, I do think that the mind requires something very deeply questing, deeply engaged, deeply hungry, deeply thin end of the wedge, basically constantly breaking through the sort of crust of reality, into some new self-generated form of being. And without that, the whole thing just turns into what I've seen in so many cases. Really, the people that aren't really doing that end up having to compensate with fantasy, and they just sit around and talk to each other and go out and share. They kind of all live in a kind of pretend fantasy dream fog or something, And I think when there's excess fantasy, and I don't mean the sort of creative, generative, inventive, Leonardo-esque kind of fantasy, but more the kind of narcotizing, opiating, comfort, ball-rubbing, couch potato-y lay around, and let's all pretend that we're being sort of inventive, creative, breakthrough people, and let's talk all the clever little formulaic little things, little sort of slogans back and forth. But basically, let's just all be unperturbed, comfortable, kind of snoozy lying around, sort of half awake in our volcanic mud bath psychology. And that shit don't cut it, man. If you're really gonna get to the next place, you have to be fully awake. You have to be fully awake to yourself. You have to be fully awake to the world. You have to be fully awake to what's going on. You have to have a very active mind. And a lot of people don't like that, I mean, they come to you, they come to your training, and you say, well, you've got to actually do some work, and you've actually got to get behind your ass with a cow prod and, jolt yourself kind of into this next layer of this surge of life into really kind of creating with your own mind, kind of creating this vessel for transformation. A lot of people don't want that. They really don't want that, And I've seen this so many times. People talk about what they want and blah blah blah. And even I've seen a lot of people in the psychedelic community, that basically psychedelics have just become, another another form of sort of couch potato culture. You know, it's like, oh yeah, like I tripped last week and, you know, I